When an arrogant officer tried to impose himself on Jason Statham, thinking that his badge made him invincible, he quickly discovered that power blinds even the most self-righteous. In an instant, the policeman found himself disarmed, humiliated, and given an unforgettable lesson in respect from the one he should never have defied. It was a quiet spring afternoon in Los Angeles, in Griffith Park. The sun shone softly on the century-old trees, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Families spread out on the lawns, children chased butterflies, and the distant sound of laughter filled the atmosphere. On a worn wooden bench under the shade of a large oak tree stood a man who needed no introduction, Jason Statham. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans with a cap that partially hid his face, marked by years of action and determination. In his hands, a bag of bread, and around him, pigeons pecking at the crumbs he gently dropped on the ground. Jason wasn't there to attract attention. He was just enjoying a moment of peace, something rare in his hectic life. But peace, as he would soon discover, never lasts long when pride and power come into play. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, Officer Brad Thompson patrolled with firm, determined steps. His uniform was impeccable, his polished boots reflected the sunlight, and his badge shone like a symbol of authority. Thompson was known among park-goers as the Tyrant. He had a reputation for abusing his power, turning routine patrols into unnecessary displays of force. That morning, 3 families had already complained about his aggressive behavior. An elderly woman claimed that he had threatened her with arrest for feeding ducks. A young father said that Thompson had kicked his children out of the playground because they were making too much noise. But the officer didn't care. For him, the badge was a shield that made him untouchable. When Thompson spotted Jason on the bench, a smile of superiority crossed his face. He had no idea that his next decision would change his life forever. Thompson approached the bench with heavy steps, his hand resting casually on his baton. The sun reflected off his badge, sending reflections that seemed to cut through the air. A group of teenagers nearby lowered their cell phones, sensing that something was about to happen. A young mother hurried to gather her children, recognizing Thompson's intimidating posture. Jason continued to feed the pigeons, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. But those who looked closely might have noticed something in his eyes. A calm awareness, like a martial arts master who senses an opponent's first move before it is made. Thompson stopped directly in front of Jason, casting his shadow over him. The pigeons scattered, but Jason remained motionless, his hands clutching the last pieces of bread. "Sir," Thompson said, stretching out the word with a mocking tone. "That bench is for active use of the park. No standing around doing nothing." Jason slowly raised his eyes to meet Thompson's. "I'm not doing nothing, officer. I'm actively feeding these birds. And they look pretty active to me," he replied, gesturing to the pigeons that were hopping around. Thompson's face flushed. "Don't get smart with me, old man. Do you think this is funny?" "No, sir," Jason replied calmly. "But those birds might. They're the only ones here being fed." Some onlookers laughed, which only irritated Thompson more. "Listen here." He leaned in, trying to be intimidating. "I don't care who you think you are. When I give an order, people follow it." Jason adjusted his cap slightly. "You know, officer, I've found that people who need to tell others how important they are usually aren't." The surrounding crowd grew. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" Another voice replied, "He has no idea who he's messing with." "Last warning," Thompson growled, his hand tightening on the baton. "Stand up, now." Jason calmly took another handful of crumbs from his paper bag. "Officer, I respect the law, but right now, the only thing breaking the peace in this park is your attitude." Thompson's face turned from red to purple. He had never been challenged so openly. His grip on the stick tightened further, and he pulled it away with a metallic snap. "Stand up now. You might want to reconsider that," Jason said softly, still sitting down. "Not for my sake, but for yours." Thompson swung the bat towards Jason's shoulder, a move he had used countless times to establish dominance, but this time it was different. Without seeming to move, Jason's hand intercepted the baton in the middle of the blow. He held on tightly, and Thompson found himself unable to pull it away. "What? Drop it!" Thompson grumbled, his face burning with shame. "Son," Jason said calmly, still holding the baton, "there are 3 things you need to know right now. First, that badge gives you responsibility, not power. Second, I've spent more time training in martial arts than you have on this planet. And third," he let go of the stick with a slight smile, "you really should have researched me before you started this." A teenager in the crowd shouted, "That's Jason Statham, man. He's a legend." Thompson's shame turned to anger. He put his baton away and picked up the taser. "On your feet! You're under arrest for assaulting an officer." Jason finally stood up, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Officer, we both know that's not true, just like we know there's no law against feeding pigeons in this park." "Shut up!" Thompson's hand was shaking as he pointed the taser. "I said you're under arrest." An older woman in the crowd shouted, "Someone call the real police. This has gone too far." Jason remained completely still, his eyes fixed on Thompson's. "Young man, how about we both take a deep breath and talk about what's really bothering you?" Thompson's finger squeezed the trigger of the taser, but something in Jason's steady gaze made him hesitate. In that moment of uncertainty, he did something that would prove to be his biggest mistake. He reached for his service weapon. The crowd held its breath. Even the birds dispersed, leaving an eerie silence in the park. "Last chance." Thompson's voice sounded slightly shaky. "On the ground, old man." Jason didn't move. His expression remained calm, but his eyes took on a different quality, like a teacher watching a student make a crucial mistake. "You know, an interesting fact about guns, officer," Jason said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "They make people feel powerful, but real power," he took a step forward, "is knowing when not to use them." "Stay away!" Thompson's hand was visibly shaking now. "Or what?" Jason asked softly. "You're going to shoot an unarmed man in front of all these witnesses for feeding pigeons?" A bead of sweat trickled down Thompson's forehead. In all his years of intimidating park-goers, he had never faced someone who seemed so completely unafraid. I'm not kidding," Thompson stammered. "Me neither," Jason replied. Jason's movement was almost too fast to see. Suddenly, Thompson's gun was in pieces on the floor, and Jason was standing exactly where he was before, as if he hadn't moved an inch. What did you do?" Thompson looked at his empty hand in disbelief. 30 years of martial arts," Jason said simply. "But more importantly, 40 years of learning when to use them." The crowd was completely silent. Even the children playing nearby stood still, realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Now you have 2 choices, son," Jason continued. "You can continue to escalate this situation, or you can take a moment to think about why you felt the need to pull a gun on a man who was feeding birds." Before Thompson could respond, an authoritative voice cut through the air. "Thompson, stop immediately." 2 senior officers were running towards them, their hands on their holsters. The older one, Captain Martinez, looked at Jason and his eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Statham," Martinez said respectfully. Then he turned to Thompson. "Officer Thompson, what the hell do you think you're doing?" He assaulted me. He took my gun," Thompson stammered. "After you pulled it on me for feeding pigeons," Jason added softly. "Don't forget that part." Martinez looked at the disassembled gun on the floor and then at Thompson. "You drew your gun for feeding pigeons." "He didn't obey." Thompson's voice rose to almost a shout. "He was wandering." Martinez interrupted him. "That's not even a valid citation in this park. We've been over this, Thompson, several times." The second officer, Johnson, was already taking statements from the crowd. "Captain," he called out, "I have at least 12 witnesses saying that Officer Thompson escalated the situation for no reason, and another 20 or so videos. And It's Jason Statham, for God's sake. Martinez rubbed his temples. The man inspired half the police force in Texas. Thompson's face went from red to pale. I didn't know. Badge and gun. Martinez held out his hand. Now. As Thompson slowly stripped off his badge, Jason spoke up. Captain, can I say a word? Martinez turned to Jason with respect. Of course, sir. I don't think your officer here is a bad person, Jason said thoughtfully. Just someone who lost his way. The crowd was getting bigger and bigger, with people filming and whispering among themselves. Some were already posting the videos online. Lost your way? Thompson sneered weakly. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think, Jason replied. I see a man who probably dreamed of making a difference when he first put on that uniform, but at some point, you started to confuse respect with fear. Several people in the crowd nodded. An elderly woman approached. He threatened to arrest my grandson last week for skateboarding. Another father added, and my children for laughing too loudly. Thompson's back dropped as more stories emerged. Each complaint seemed to deflate him even more, the reality of his behavior finally seeping in. The thing about fear, son, Jason continued, his voice echoing through the now silent park, is that it's like a boomerang. Use it against others, and eventually it will come back to you. I wasn't afraid, Thompson murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. Everyone feels afraid, Jason said. The brave admit it, the wise learn from it. Captain Martinez watched this exchange with growing interest. He had expected to find disaster. Instead, he was witnessing something completely different, a moment of transformation. Jason turned to Captain Martinez. You know, in my years of teaching martial arts, I've seen this before. Sometimes the most aggressive students end up being the best when they learn to channel that energy in the right way. Thompson looked up, surprised. What are you talking about? I'm talking about second chances, said Jason. Captain, instead of firing him, what if Officer Thompson here underwent some additional training? Maybe some martial arts classes to learn discipline, some community work to reconnect with the people he's supposed to protect. Martinez considered this. Mr. Statham, after what he just did... I know, Jason interrupted softly, but think about it. What serves the community best? Firing him and letting that anger build, or helping him become the cop he should have been all along? Thompson stared at Jason, confused. Why would you help me? Because 30 years ago, I was a lot like you, Jason revealed, always trying to prove something. Then I had a teacher who showed me a better way. Sometimes that's what a person needs. The crowd fell silent, absorbing this unexpected turn of events. The same old lady who had complained earlier spoke up. If Mr. Statham thinks he deserves a chance, well, I guess we could too. Captain Martinez nodded slowly. That would mean a demotion, mandatory counseling, and a full reconditioning program, and Jason added with a slight smile. I know a good dojo in the area. The instructor there owes me a favor. Thompson's eyes were shining now. I don't deserve that. No, Jason agreed. But that's what grace is all about. The real question is, are you willing to do the job? Thompson's training wouldn't be easy. Captain Martinez laid out the terms. 6 months probation, starting at the lowest rank, weekly counseling sessions, community work every weekend, and, most importantly, mandatory martial arts training with the instructor recommended by Jason, a notoriously strict Navy veteran. One more complaint about abuse of power, Martinez added firmly. A single incident, and you won't just be fired. You'll face charges. Those videos won't go away. The crowd seemed satisfied with this justice. Several people were already sharing their videos with captions like, Jason Statham teaches dirty cop a lesson, an instant karma for park bully. Jason picked up the pieces of Thompson's disassembled gun from the floor, reassembling it with precision. Instead of returning it to Thompson, he handed it to Martinez. He'll win that back when he's ready, if he's ready. Jason returned to his bench with his bag of birdseed. The pigeons, realizing that the tension had passed, began to return. Thompson stood there, uncomfortable, his uniform looking heavier than ever, without his badge and gun. "Officer Thompson," Jason called out, without looking up from the pigeons. "One more thing." "Yes, sir?" "Every morning for the next 6 months before your shift, you're going to clean this park. All of it. Every piece of garbage, every leaf. While you're doing that, you can think about how many people you've bullied in the same park. Each one of them deserves a personal apology." Word spread quickly about what happened that day in Griffith Park. Videos went viral, showing not only Jason's incredible disarming, but also his unexpected mix of justice and wisdom. The story became something of a local legend. Thompson showed up the next morning at dawn with a bag of garbage in his hands. And every morning after that, some days, morning joggers would see him practicing martial arts moves in between picking up garbage. Clumsy at first, but gradually improving. The angry gait disappeared from his walk, replaced by something more measured, more conscious. Jason stopped by occasionally, silently feeding the pigeons while Thompson worked. No conversation was necessary. The lesson had been learned. Sometimes, the heaviest blows don't come from fists or guns, but from simple acts of justice and mercy. The park has changed too. The families returned, the children played freely again, and even the pigeons seemed more at peace. The tyrant of the park was gone, and in his place, a humble man was slowly rebuilding his reputation. One piece of trash, one apology, and one martial arts lesson at a time. 6 months later, Thompson was reinstated in the police force, but in a lower position and under strict supervision. He never abused his authority again. In fact, he became an advocate for police reform, using his own story as an example of how power can corrupt, but also how humility can redeem. Jason Statham continued to visit the park, feeding the pigeons and occasionally giving a word of wisdom to those in need. He never spoke about the incident with Thompson, but those who were there that day never forgot it. And so, in the heart of Los Angeles, in a park full of life and stories, a lesson was learned. True strength lies not in how much power you have, but in how you choose to use it.